Have you ever felt like you're still building while everyone else already arrived? There's a man you probably know, or maybe you are him. Late 30s, maybe 40s, not broke, not falling apart, but he watches guys he went to school with post about their companies, their titles, their next house, and something tightens in his chest. Not jealousy exactly, something quieter, more like, what did they figure out that I didn't? He doesn't say that out loud. He drives home, does what needs to be done, and puts that feeling somewhere he doesn't revisit. But underneath it all, somewhere he'd never say out loud, one thought keeps coming back. I'm not behind, I'm just not finished yet. If that sounds familiar, this video is about why that thought might be more accurate than you've been giving it credit for, and why the men who take the longest to arrive are often the ones who build something that doesn't fall apart. Most men who build slowly don't talk about it. They're not going to tell you they feel behind. They're not going to explain the years that looked like wandering. They just keep moving, pay the bills, show up where they're needed, put one more thing in the foundation even when they can't see the structure yet. That's the thing about men who are in the middle of this. From the outside, it looks like not much is happening. From the inside, it feels like everything is happening at once, and none of it fits into any shape that makes sense yet. Psychologists who study how men develop over time have found something consistent. A lot of men don't hit their highest sense of purpose or competence in their 20s or 30s. They hit it in their 40s and 50s. But those early years, they don't look like preparation. They look like confusion, and that's the part nobody talks about. Some men cannot build on a foundation they don't believe in. This isn't about being difficult. It isn't about fear of success or some psychological block that needs to be cleared. It's something more structural. There are men who, when they try to step into a career, a role, an identity that doesn't actually fit them, feel something in them refuse. Not loudly, not dramatically, just an inability to commit with their whole weight to something that feels false. So they hesitate. They try things and stop. They take jobs that look reasonable and leave them for reasons they can't fully explain. They watch other people move with confidence into lives that feel completely out of reach, not because those lives are harder, but because they're the wrong shape. Carl Jung had a name for this. He believed that pushing certain men into an identity too early didn't produce success, it produced a fracture. A life that looked right from the outside, but quietly fell apart from the inside. The men you see at 45, 50, quietly devastated by everything they built and don't want, that's not what happened to the men who came slower. They paid a different price, earlier. Here's the everyday version of this. The man who stayed in a job for 3 years that everyone thought was perfect for him and quit for something that paid less and confused his family. The man who couldn't just pick a lane and stay in it the way his friends seemed to do without thinking. He didn't know why, he just knew the lane didn't fit. That's not failure of ambition. That's a man whose internal compass is so sensitive it refuses to lock on to something that isn't true. It's not a gift in your 20s, it's actually hell in your 20s. But it's a different story by the time you're 45. And here's what happens in the years between. The men who build slowly become intimate with their own failure, not in a self-pitying way. There's nothing soft about it. It's more like they sit with things that didn't work. They stay in the discomfort longer than most people can tolerate. They don't perform optimism they don't feel. Some men describe this period in ways that are hard to forget. They say they quit jobs, started things and stopped them, moved from path to path without landing anywhere. They knew what they were capable of, they could feel it clearly, but they had no answer for why they couldn't execute it yet. That gap between what you sense you are and what you've actually built is one of the loneliest places a man can live, almost impossible to explain to anyone who hasn't been there. What's harder to see from the outside is this. That gap isn't emptiness, it's pressure, and pressure over enough time changes the material. Psychologists who study how people hold up under long-term difficulty have found something that runs counter to what most people expect. Men who spent more time failing, more time wandering, more time sitting with uncertainty, they don't just endure it, they come out reading situations at a level most people can't reach. Not because they're smarter, because they've seen more of what's actually underneath. They stopped trusting the surface of things, and that changes how they move. While other men were learning how to win, he was learning the mechanics underneath winning. That difference is invisible at 30. It's decisive at 50. Now here's the part that gets misread constantly. Men in the middle of this delay, they often go quiet, not because nothing is happening, because everything is internal, and they don't know how to explain what isn't finished yet. The people around them sometimes read this as passivity, as giving up, as a man who couldn't handle things. That reading is almost always wrong. What's actually happening is a kind of self-construction that happens below the surface. The man who works a job he's overqualified for without making it anyone else's problem. The man who shows up for his kids on the days he has nothing left. The man who looks from the outside like someone who never quite made it and is the only one in the room who knows exactly what he's been doing all along. Jung believed that the kind of man who gets built this way, slowly, under pressure, without shortcuts, carries something that can't be faked. Not confidence in the way people perform it, something heavier than that, a consistency. The same man at work, at home, under pressure when nobody's watching. That doesn't announce itself, but people feel it. The man who speaks less and means more when he does. The man whose decisions when they come are clean, not because he was always confident, because he waited until he actually knew. The man who doesn't need to perform stability because he spent years building it. But there's a version of this story that doesn't end well. And it's important to say it plainly. Some men who go through everything described above, the delay, the wandering, the years that looked like nothing, arrive at the other side carrying a wound that poisons the whole thing. They measure themselves against timelines that were never built for them. They look at the years that went into building their foundation and call it wasted time. They become bitter in a quiet way that hardens into a permanent low-grade resentment of their own life. That's the one thing that can kill a late emergence, not the delay itself, not the failure, not the years that looked like confusion, the story a man tells himself about those years. There are men who make it all the way to 60, 70 years old, and they're still measuring themselves against a version of their life that was never theirs to begin with, still carrying the weight of every year that didn't look like enough. And there are men who reach that same age and say, maybe for the first time, that they finally feel like themselves. The difference between those two men isn't talent. It isn't luck, it's the story they decided to tell about what the delay was actually for. The men who arrive, and there are men who arrive, quietly and without fanfare, they make a different move with the past. Not a therapeutic one, not some forgiveness ritual, something more practical than that. They stop carrying the past as evidence of what's wrong with them and start reading it as a record of how they were built. Every failed path that cleared the ground, every year of endurance that stress-tested the foundation, every job that didn't fit, proof of a compass that was working even when it was inconvenient. That reframe is not optimism, it's accuracy. Because from the outside, there's no difference between a man who wasted a decade and a man who spent a decade building something no one could see yet. The only difference is what the man himself knows about what happened during those years. There's a specific thing that happens to men like this in the second half of life that's hard to describe from the outside. The urgency disappears. Not the ambition, that's still there, maybe sharper than ever, but the desperate need to prove something, to get somewhere before it's too late, to match the timeline everyone else seemed to be on, that goes quiet. And in its place, something more functional takes over, a kind of deliberateness. Nothing is wasted. Decisions that used to take months of internal warfare become clear. The man who couldn't commit to anything in his 30s starts making choices with a precision that surprises people. He's not confident in the way early achievers are confident, that brittle certainty that can crack under real pressure. He's something different. He's settled. He's done the internal work that most people defer until midlife crisis forces on them. So when the pressure comes, and it always comes, he doesn't lose the thread of who he is. He already knows. That's not something you can fake. And it's not something that comes fast. It comes from years of being the man who kept going when there was no visible reason to, and building something real out of that. So if you're in the middle of the delay right now, still trying to figure out the shape of your life, still watching others accumulate the markers you don't have yet, here's the only thing worth saying. The years that look like nothing are not nothing. They're expensive. They're lonely in a specific way that doesn't translate well into conversation, and there's no shortcut through them. But the man who comes out the other side of that period, who didn't fake his way through it, who didn't trade his actual self for the relief of fitting somewhere, that man is built differently than men who got there faster. Not better, not more special, just built on ground that will actually hold. The question isn't whether you're behind. The question is whether you're building something real or building something that will feel hollow the moment you arrive. Most men never find out the difference. The men who do, you already know what that cost them to learn. If any part of this felt like something you've been living without having the words for, I'd genuinely like to hear it. Drop it in the comments. Sometimes one man's story is exactly what another man needed to read today.